Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're well. I'm just going to share my screen now in a second. It's already hiding on me. So today's session really is just about, as Katie said, looking at the new access plan and about making sure that the approach that we take and that our work is totally and completely informed by our members. Obviously, it is you who's working on the ground. It's your perspectives and expertise that we want to make sure that we're working from. And you know, there has been some good work done in the last while, but there's a lot more to do. So we really are open and hoping that between the lot of us that we can suggest some excellent recommendations to dramatically improve the system, I suppose. So the vision of the National Access Plan previously is to ensure that the student body entering, participating in and completing higher education at all levels reflects the diversity and social mix of Ireland's population. And I think we all know that at present that is certainly not the case, and that's why we're here today. And the current National Access Plan was meant to run from 2015 to 2019 and was extended based on review with some funding located there. But in terms of the actual target groups, it was entrants from socioeconomic groups that have low participation in higher education, first-time mature students, students with disabilities, part-time and flexible learners, further education and training award holders, Irish travellers, and then also the National Access Plan indicated subgroups that require particular support, including lone parents, teen parents, and people who are have ethnic minority backgrounds. Now, I do have, as I said, a presentation here, and I know I'm flying through it, but what we're trying to do today is to keep most of the time for the discussion, because we're here to learn from you. And there's probably people in this group who are much more expert on this topic than I am. So if you have anything that you'd like to share or suggestions or anything or pieces of information, please don't hesitate to come in at any time. In terms of the situation, I suppose, in the context, there's been a significant increase in student numbers to higher education over the last years. So originally, we would have seen a few hundred people move on from secondary education. Obviously, it was private previously until the 1960s. And then now there's thousands of people who enter higher education. But unfortunately, as we know, that representation in HE is still very much about people who have a privileged background or middle income or higher income. It's very low in terms of figures for people who come from disadvantaged communities. And the expected growth, there is expected growth to continue of entrants entering into higher education. And it's been described as many academics as a mass model of learning at this stage. And in terms of those figures, I'm going to go through some of the points here that were from the progress review from the National Access Plan. And you can see there from the traveller community, there was 48 entrants who were Irish travellers in the review compared to when it started, there was only 26. And now there's 110 students enrolled in HEIs who are travellers compared to 78. Now those figures are actually still behind in the times. And we just checked this morning, and the latest figure is actually only 61 travellers enrolled in higher education. And now there may be others who didn't self-identify, but as we know, that it's disgustingly low, really, just to put it bluntly, which highlights the barriers that are faced by travellers in accessing higher education, which isn't acceptable. So we really want to make sure that there's changes on that front. In terms of students with disabilities, there's 12.3% of new entrants who are students with disabilities. And then in terms of people socioeconomically disadvantaged, there's 10% on average who are in higher education institutions, and that compares to 20% of average who come from affluent backgrounds. Now, that's in saying on the average higher education institution, but actually in the elite institutions, which is the likes of Trinity, UCD, they only have 5% on average of students from disadvantaged backgrounds. So it really does not reflect the diversity of society in general. And also, which is very poor in terms of figures, is first-time mature students. So that figure has actually dropped. So there was an average of 13%, and the target for the National Access Plan at the time was 16%. That's actually dropped to 7.1%, which is really quite poor as well. So some very radical and innovative changes are needed. And hopefully today we can come together and come up with a few, and they might actually take them on board. We are hopeful. But as I said, there's a lot of work to be done. In terms of FET learners and pathways into higher education, there is the HELS scheme, so the Higher Education Link scheme, and that gives learners the opportunity to use their QQI level 5 or 6 major award to apply through the CAO for a place in the first year of a higher education programme. Now, 10% of students in 2020 were recorded as using that. That's not to say that there's only 10% of students in higher education who have come through the FET route. It's just that's those that were recorded as using their FET qualifications specifically to enter into higher education. So for example, if you were also someone who was a mature student, or maybe someone who identified as having a disability or a member of the traveller community, you might have been recorded underneath a different category or come in through a different route. There's also the issue of figures, the numbers, the points are capped if you're coming in through the HELS program. So you can only get a certain amount of points, which automatically excludes people from a lot of the higher points-based courses, say, for example, like medicine. And actually, interestingly, at the same time, there is also a continued reflection of people from upper and middle class backgrounds entering into the same programs, which are often the programs and often the same institutions that have higher paid income jobs later on. So for example, if you are someone who has come from a privileged background, you're much more likely to go on to study medicine or engineering. And if you've come from a working class background, quite often they will go into caring and support services, so social care, working in the community, and then those who may be due higher in points, they would go into primary school teaching. So that's the general figures that was reported at the last National Access Plan Steering Group. And also for learners coming through FET, they're subject to differential treatment based on HEI policy. So even though there is this program to bring people through HELS into higher education institutions, it's actually not the same across the board. So an institution still has the autonomy to be able to identify which programs they think it's suitable to bring learners in from and how many that they'll accept. So just for example, on the diversity of that alone, in TCD, they'll accept FET qualification into 5 programs, and that's only 17 places, whereas NUI Maynooth have 168 places that they give for students coming in through the FET qualification route. And then also it can be quite challenging because it can be a game of needing spaces and popularity at the time. So for example, if you're someone who's coming in and there was a lower rate of students applying for, say, education and training in DCU one year, then what quite often the colleges will do is then accept more students through the HELS program and reach out to maybe a local FET provider and to have more that year. And so then if a student is coming into that FET program in their local, say Whitehall College of Further Education, for example, they are not guaranteed in some programs to then be able to enter in. It really is based on the decision from the college in that year. So it's quite unfortunate because a lot of FET students, unless there is a specific agreement in place, they don't have automatic entry in. So it's very competitive in an already very competitive environment. Now, the PATH program is another area which is quite interesting, and that has a dedicated fund broken into 3 strands, and the fund is 30 million. So in PATH Strand 1, initial teacher education, which I have to say is a very welcome initiative because it's looking at increasing the number of students from underrepresented groups entering into initial teacher training education, and providing more role models for students from these groups, demonstrating that there are pathways open to them to realise their potential through education is the objectives. And you can see that happening, say, for example, in Maynooth. I just would have more awareness of that program, that there's great work being done there. And obviously there's a lot more that needs to happen as well. In Path 2, the 1916 bursaries. So this was mentioned a lot at the recent Roma and Traveller Forum for access to education as well, to higher education, that it is a very welcome move, but quite often the bursaries aren't enough, and there aren't enough bursaries to be able to support members of the community. So the purpose of this bursary fund is to commemorate the centenary of 1916 and underline the government's commitment to the type of equality of opportunity envisaged by the signatories of the 1916 proclamation. And then strand 3, which is probably most relevant for us here today, that's intended to provide funding to support the development of regional and community partnership strategies for increasing access to higher education by specific groups. But even though that strand is there, there is no community representatives in terms of the steering group, and also the funding is quite often not given out to the community in the way that it could be for meaningful partnerships. But we think that that's probably the area that would be most relevant for a lot of the groups who are our members, that might be able to engage and identify new ways of building partnerships so we can support learners coming from community ed into higher education as well. The new National Access Plan will be from 2022 to 2026. And there is a background paper, and I'll share the link to that, but basically that'll give you an overview of the situation at the moment and the plans going forward. And they are accepting submissions, so AONTAS will be writing up a submission, and we really want to hear from you. And today is about getting your thoughts and your recommendations, your perspectives, everything at all. Please tell us everything and be really honest, and we will put that together. And we'll also reach out to a number of other organizations. So for example, in the last SUSI policy submission, we reached out to different organizations that we would work with, and we shared recommendations specifically for lone parents and also for travellers. So we're really eager to do that again. And the more perspectives and experience that we can gather for this, obviously, the better. In terms of the questions that they've provided, these don't have to be followed exactly, or they all don't have to be answered, but it's just a nice guiding tool. So it's something to think about. Maybe if you want to follow up and send us an email again afterwards, or I can create a survey if that would suit people better. What should our overall vision for equity of access to higher education in Ireland be for 2022 to 2026? Who are the target groups that should be specified in the next National Access Plan? How do we ensure that vulnerable members of our society are included? How can pre-entry and post-entry activities be developed? How can current funding programs be better utilised to further the objectives of the National Access Plan? How can the goal of mainstreaming be further embedded within HEIs? How can a whole of education approach widen participation in higher education be achieved? And how can pathways between further education training and higher education be better developed? How can other social inclusion initiatives outside of the higher education sector be harnessed to support equity of access objectives? And what challenges has COVID-19 presented in relation to an inclusive higher education system, and how can they be addressed? So as you can see, there's a lot of questions there. But what we're going to focus on today is just a hand-picked few that we thought would be quite relevant, but please do share your perspectives on anything else. So we're going to go into breakout rooms now for about 20 minutes. I know I've absolutely thrown a lot of information at you there, but I was trying to just keep it as short as possible without going into the kind of bigger political issues or the philosophical issues around access and the true meaning of access and the impact. But as I said, it's really about gathering your views. So the questions that we have is, how do we ensure the most vulnerable members of society are included? How can a whole of education approach to widen participation in higher education be achieved? And how can pathways between FET and community education and HE be better developed? And how can challenges from COVID-19 be addressed? So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen there. And Barry kindly has shared the messages in the chat. Thanks a million, Barry. So we're going to go into breakout rooms now in a second. But as I said, look, I know policy can be a difficult area for people if it's not an area that you're used to talking about or working within. So please don't feel in the group that, well, I'm not an expert in this, I don't have anything to give. You, of course, are an expert because you work in the area. So anything at all, any of your experience, any situations or stories from your learners, or any general perspectives, there is no wrong answers. Please just give your insights and be honest. And if you have questions, just let us know. That would be fantastic. And we'll come back together then and share any feedback or ideas that we have and recommendations. Thanks so much, guys. See you in there.
Just say a few things that I said, but there's a lot of good stuff. We talked about the supports for the most vulnerable people are really this kind of a coach mentoring approach, so that the people will gain confidence as learners. I mean, that's the secret to success at any level of education, is your confidence as a learner. And if people don't have confidence as learners, or are unable to build up confidence in themselves as capable of learning and being able to stick the course, because third level is hard, that's really important. And we also made the point about the importance of greater clarity in the information provided about courses from the third level institutions. I mean, people people have to know what the course will lead them to in terms of employment capabilities, or perhaps the stepping stone to another course or whatever. And that's not very clear at all, and also, now I see Nala's here, plain language. Quite often, the language from the third level institutions is anything but plain. It assumes a degree of knowledge about global business speak almost, that actually is extremely elitist. So that was lots of other contributions.
Group, we felt that getting information across to people was the important thing, making them aware of the services that are available to help them access higher education in the first place, and then also getting them access to guidance counsellors and building up partnerships with we say the likes of here in Waterford. We have a good relationship with the WWETB, and they would come and discuss the course content with people, so they're fully aware of what it's going to involve, and they don't end up doing a course that isn't what they thought it was. We also discussed the fact that people who are coming to higher education from different paths, such as our own, that education should be valued equally as the Leaving Cert is, because a lot of times these people have worked even harder just to get their foothold on that ladder to higher education. And it needs to be fully valued and recognised, because the diversity that can come into higher education institutes and colleges as a result of having people from different cultures, backgrounds, educational experience and so forth is beneficial to everybody overall. Lecturers even say it in colleges that they like when they've people from different age groups, different cultural backgrounds and stuff. It adds more to the conversation in the rooms and gives people a bit more appreciation for the education they're getting as well. We also discussed the importance of just maintaining relationships and developing good working relationships with area partnerships and with businesses that maybe do offer some kind of training and things like that as well, so that kind of once you have somebody working with them or something like that, that you could maybe filter other people through their higher education facilities that they have as well.
Comment just to say, because I think it was interesting when we were talking about higher education, it was also around that the value of further education, and we're sort of the privilege sense and yeah, but look, in the context absolutely of this submission it's trying to put the value base really around and I suppose for us, Siobhan, I don't know whether you're in at the very beginning, what we were trying to say is there are many adults who spend a while back in the literacy services, moving up in levels 1, 2, 3 upwards to 4, and the transitioning into third level if they want to, of course, it's all choice and thing. To me, the supports just are not there in the level that we would need to look at, and that is a combination of everything. Everyone's mentioned them: plain language, coaching and mentoring, confidence, all of that. But then I'm even jumping the person. Imagine we get through all of that and the person managed and the students managed to get into third level. Some of the concerns that we're finding at the minute is we're having people ring us on our free phone line in third level who have literacy, numeracy and digital literacy needs, particularly obviously the literacy needs. So again, pushing that needs to go back into the university and the higher education sector to support people within the sector around these study skills. So if they haven't gained some of the study skills that they need going in, then are the higher education institutions looking at that? Because why would you go in? How many are dropping out? I can't even tell you, I don't have the statistics about how many people went from, levels 1, 2, 3 and 4 over the years into, again, that isn't something that's told us, or we see that in a massive reporting piece. So there's probably lots for us to drill out around where it's just not as easy, I suppose my point is, in getting in. That is one part, but it's when they're in there, how are we supporting them or how is the system supporting them? So that was really the points I was making, but I thought Siobhan's point was absolutely valid, that it isn't just, FE is really where it's at and so important, but helping people to get into HE then as well.
Something Helen did say, just the kind of way that you phrased it, Helen, was around learners seeing themselves in higher ed, seeing role models and, figures to aspire to, that being so important. It has kind of been covered there, just in maybe not seeing the diversity of learners in higher ed compared to further ed.
So thanks a million for everything today, guys. It was really great to see you. Thanks for all your input. It was excellent. Looking forward to seeing you again at the next webinar. And as I said, please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have anything at all that you'd like to share. We'd love to hear from you. And if you would like to look at any of our other policy submissions, you can see them under publications on the AONTAS website there as well. So thanks a million, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.